David has been anointed king over all Israel. He conquered the city of Jerusalem and moved the Ark of the Covenant to Zion, the city of David. And Yahweh entered into a covenant with David in 2 Samuel 7 that his offspring would rule Israel forever. If any of David's descendants were to sin against Yahweh, Yahweh would discipline them, but he would never remove his steadfast love from the house of David. Now, this promise is going to be put to the test in 2 Samuel 11, the Bathsheba episode. Now, this narrative is sandwiched between two accounts of David's military conflict with the Ammonites. The first one, in chapter 10, begins with David's sympathy for Hanun, who is the king of the Ammonites. His father, Nahash, just died, and David sent delegates to Hanun, expressing his sympathy over the death of his father. But Hanun interprets this as an act of war, and he humiliates David's delegates and sends them packing. So David is here in the city of David in Jerusalem, and here's the capital of the Ammonites, Rabbah, and he sends his delegates over there, but Hanun sends them right back. And David communicates to these delegates who are humiliated, their beards are cut off, and they are sent back half naked. He says, "Wait in Jericho until your beards have grown back." And then David sends from Jerusalem Joab, his military commander, to retaliate against the Ammonites. Well, Hanun and the Ammonites intercept Joab here at Medaba, where Joab is forced to fight a combined force of Ammonites and Syrians, whom he defeats in chapter 10. Well, these Ammonites regroup and they hire mercenaries from way up north, a massive coalition, and David sends Joab to battle again against this large force in Halam, which is soundly defeated by Israel under the military oversight of Joab. Joab returns, and then David sends him once more to finish the job and besiege the city of Rabbah. And it is during this siege, Joab is fighting against the Ammonites, and David stays home in Jerusalem, and he's walking on the roof of his palace, and he sees a woman bathing. Now, in these chapters, we have the very last military conflict that's recorded in these two books against a foreign nation. It's against Nahash, or the son of Nahash of the Ammonites. Now, the very first military conflict of Saul, king of Israel, was also against Nahash. Isn't that interesting? Now, what is the relevance of this? First battle against Nahash in 1 Samuel 11. Last battle against the son of Nahash, that is the offspring or the seed of the serpent. How curious, in 2 Samuel chapter 10. Well, after Saul's conflict with Nahash, his victory, right after that, he's going to eat from the tree, you may say. It's his fall moments, failing to listen to the word of Yahweh. Likewise, after David defeats the son of Nahash, here in chapter 10, his fall moment, his Genesis 3 moment, takes place here in 2 Samuel chapter 11. And it's very clear that the narrator of 1 and 2 Samuel intends us to read this as a Genesis 3 fall moment because of the shared vocabulary between that chapter in Genesis and this chapter here in 2 Samuel. Let me walk you through the literary parallels between these chapters. Here in Genesis 3, we see that Eve, the woman, she saw that the tree was good, so she took of the tree, and then she realized she was naked. We have the same sequence of words taking place in the David story here in 2 Samuel 11, where he saw a woman bathing from the roof, and she was good in his eyes. She was beautiful. The word is tov in Hebrew. It's the same word in Genesis 3. So David took her, and he was naked. He lay with Bathsheba. Well, notice also the spatial imagery at work in this chapter. Where is David when he sees Bathsheba? He is up high. He is high on a roof looking down. Now, what is the book's opinion of tall people so far? Well, we know that tall Saul was rejected by Yahweh, wasn't he? Here we are. Saul was a man of wealth. He was handsome and he was taller than any of the people by a full head in Israel. But his kingdom was rejected. David's oldest brother, Eliab, he is also high. Samuel admires the height of his stature, but Yahweh rejected him. The highest person in the Bible, the tallest, is certainly Goliath, whose height was either 6 cubits and a span or 4 cubits and a span. Nonetheless, the tallest man recorded in the Bible, without doubt. But Yahweh brought this tall man down. However, now in 2 Samuel 11, David, he is in the category of the proud, the self-exalted, the arrogant, where he is up high looking down. And Yahweh sends Nathan, the prophet Nathan, to rebuke David. And notice how Nathan describes David using the same kind of proud, arrogant, self-exalted language. He tells a little parable where he compares David to a rich man who stole a poor man's lamb. You see, rich and poor. This is the proud and the humble. Well, David, you are that man, the rich man who stole from the poor man. And therefore, Nathan communicates how this rich man will be humbled. He says that the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me, taken the wife of Uriah. Behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house. Now, we see this is exactly what happens in the following chapters, where the sins of David, murder and adultery, are multiplied in his children. Amnon, his son, is going to rape Tamar, his half-sister, David's daughter. And then Absalom is going to commit revenge against Amnon. How could you rape my sister like that? And he murders Amnon 2 years later. Well, Absalom is going to flee from the scene of the crime and escape north to Geshur at this point. The scene of the crime was in Baal Hazor. This is where Absalom murders Amnon, and then he flees to the king of Geshur, where he stays for 3 full years. And it is only with the conniving of Joab and the wise woman of Tekoa who convinces David to allow Absalom to return to Jerusalem, which he does, but David says, he shall be banished from my presence. I do not want to see Absalom again. And so he is. Absalom's banished for 2 full years. After that point, 4 years later, Absalom is slowly gaining influence within Israel, gaining enough support to make a run at the throne. And he does this in chapter 15 in Hebron, where he announces publicly, Absalom is king in Hebron. And David realizes the seriousness of this threat, and so he gathers a number of his loyal supporters with him and flees from Jerusalem, crossing the Jordan before making his way up to Mahanaim, where he stays in exile for a time. Now, this whole sequence, this whole rebellion sequence, is designed as a chiasm. David's escape and flight from out of Jerusalem matches his return from Jerusalem in chapter 19, focusing on the exact same details. Let's look at this chiasm, which places these 2 events side by side. David is going to escape from Jerusalem, and there's a number of characters which are significant and play a role in this escape. Abishai, Shimei, Mephibosheth, Ziba, Barzillai, these same exact characters return in chapter 19. And then there's this special focus of David's time at the fords of the Jordan, at the Jordan River. He stays there initially, but then he's warned by Hushai to keep on going, cross the Jordan. And this focus on David's crossing the Jordan again, this time from east to west, is repeated in chapter 19. But At the center of this chiasm is Absalom and his defeat and death. He is going to pursue David into the forests of Ephraim. He's convinced by David's double agent, Hushai, to chase after David, and this is where he meets his demise. Now, the news of Absalom's death, it devastates David, who was consistently portrayed throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel as having compassion and mercy towards his enemies. This is, of course, a major theme within 1st and 2nd Samuel, vindicating David's claim to the throne, where when Absalom is nearing the time of his death, David pleads with his military commanders, with Joab, please deal gently with my sake with the young man Absalom, begging them, please don't put him to death. But of course, Absalom does die, and afterwards the king was deeply moved, and he wept, crying out, Absalom, Absalom, oh, my son, Absalom. Now, these final years of David's life portray him as a sad and broken man. However, this title of the man after God's own heart is never revoked from David, such that throughout the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, every single king is compared to David, who is upheld as Israel's greatest example of faithfulness that the nation has ever known. Look at some of these comparisons which are made. This is a retrospective prophetic assessment of the reign of David. Here in chapter 9 of 1 Kings, the Lord appeared to Solomon and said to him, if you walk before me as David your father walked. How did David walk? With integrity of heart, with uprightness, doing all that I commanded him, keeping my statutes and my rules. Again, in chapter 11, when Solomon was old, his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as the heart of David was. David's heart was true to Yahweh. Solomon, he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and did not wholly follow Yahweh, as David his father had done. Look now at chapter 15. Abijam began to rule over Judah. He reigned 3 years in Jerusalem, and he walked in all the sins of his father before him. His heart was not wholly true to Yahweh his God, as the heart of David his father was. You see, David did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh. He did not turn aside from anything that Yahweh commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. But even still, consistently, again and again, David is considered as a man who did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He was the ideal model for all the kings of Judah and the model for the Messiah himself. Now, this messianic model, it is the centerpiece of the closing epilogue of the book of 2 Samuel, and we're going to take a look at that epilogue next.